In the heart of the ancient Near East were the great powers of Egypt. The Hittites and Assyria clashed for dominance. There once thundered across the plains a force that would reshape the Bronze Age world. Warriors mounted in chariots drawn by the finest horses ever bred, masters of a military technology so advanced it would define warfare for centuries. They called themselves the people of Hanigalbat. The Egyptians knew them as Naharin. History remembers them, when it remembers them at all, as the Mitanni. For over 2 centuries, this forgotten empire commanded the respect of pharaohs, dictated terms to Assyrian kings, and stood as equals alongside the greatest civilizations of the Bronze Age. Yet today, their capital city remains undiscovered, their written records scattered and fragmentary, their very existence known only to scholars and history enthusiasts. This is the story of the Mitanni, the horse lords who mastered the chariot, the diplomats who married their princesses to Egyptian pharaohs, the warriors whose elite cavalry defined an age. This is the story of how they rose from mysterious origins to dominate the Near East, and how they fell, crushed between the millstones of Hittite ambition and Assyrian revenge. To understand the Mitanni, we must first understand the world into which they emerged. The late Bronze Age of the ancient Near East, a world unlike anything that came before or would come after. The 16th century BCE witnesses an unprecedented development in human history. For the first time, multiple great powers exist simultaneously, each controlling vast territories, each possessing sophisticated administrative systems, each capable of projecting military force hundreds of miles from their homelands. To the southwest, Egypt enters its New Kingdom period, having expelled the foreign Hyksos rulers. The warrior pharaohs of the 18th dynasty cast their eyes towards Syria and Palestine, determined to create a buffer zone against future invasion. Their armies, battle-hardened and equipped with the chariot technology learned from their former oppressors, push northward along the Levantine coast. To the north, in the mountains of Anatolia, the Hittite kingdom consolidates its power. These Indo-European speakers have perfected iron-working techniques and built a military machine capable of striking deep into Syria. Their king, Mursili Sari, has already accomplished what seemed impossible, sacking the ancient city of Babylon itself in 1595 BCE. To the east and south, the Kassites established their rule over Babylonia, while Assyria, though currently diminished, broods in its heartland around the city of Ashur, waiting for its moment to rise again. Between these giants, across the plains of northern Syria and upper Mesopotamia, stretches a vast territory that will become the heart of the Mitanni Empire. This region, watered by the upper reaches of the Euphrates and the Kabul River, blessed with fertile soil and positioned at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, becomes the stage for one of history's most dramatic and least remembered powers. The foundation upon which the Mitanni Empire rises is the Hurrian civilization, a people whose origins stretch back into the 3rd millennium BCE, whose language forms its own unique branch, unrelated to the Semitic tongues of Mesopotamia or the Indo-European languages of the north. The Hurrians are not newcomers to this region. For over 1,000 years, they have been part of the complex ethnic tapestry of northern Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence reveals Hurrian presence in the Kabul River Valley as early as 2300 BCE. They have built cities, developed sophisticated pottery techniques, and created religious traditions that will influence the entire Near East. Hurrian scribes adapt cuneiform writing to their language, creating administrative records, religious texts, and legal documents. Their gods, Teshub the storm god, Hepat his consort, and a complex pantheon of deities, receive worship in temples across northern Syria and Mesopotamia. But the Hurrians, despite their long history and cultural sophistication, have never unified under a single political authority. They live in independent city-states, sometimes allied, sometimes at war with each other, always vulnerable to pressure from the more centralized powers surrounding them. This fragmentation makes them subjects of conquest. The third dynasty of Ur controls them briefly around 2000 BCE. Later, they fall under the sphere of influence of various Mesopotamian kingdoms. Some Hurrian cities become vassals to the old Assyrian trading network. Others align with the kingdom of Yamhad, centered on Aleppo. Then, sometime in the 18th or 17th century BCE, something extraordinary happens. A new element enters the Hurrian world, a warrior aristocracy unlike anything the Near East has seen before. They call themselves the Maryannu, a name that scholars trace to Indo-Aryan roots, possibly deriving from a Sanskrit word meaning young warrior. These are not ordinary soldiers. They are specialists in a revolutionary military technology that is transforming warfare across the entire ancient world. The light-fast war chariot. Recent linguistic evidence from Tel Leilan in northeastern Syria reveals the term Maryannu, appearing in texts dating to around 1760 BCE, providing our earliest glimpse of these mysterious warriors. Their arrival coincides with the introduction of a sophisticated horse breeding and chariot training tradition, techniques that transform military capabilities across the region. The Maryannu bring with them not just military skills, but also cultural elements that reveal their origins. They worship gods with names clearly derived from the Indo-Aryan Vedic tradition: Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatya twins. These deities appear in Mitanni treaties and royal inscriptions, standing alongside traditional Hurrian gods in a remarkable religious synthesis. How did these Indo-Aryan warriors reach northern Syria? The question remains one of ancient history's great mysteries. Did they migrate gradually from the Indo-European homeland? Were they part of larger population movements that also brought Indo-European languages to Anatolia, Greece, and Iran? Or were they a relatively small elite group that moved south through the Caucasus, attracted by opportunities in the wealthy civilizations of the Fertile Crescent? Whatever their origins, the Maryannu do not conquer the Hurrians in the traditional sense. Instead, something more subtle and historically significant occurs: a fusion of cultures. The Maryannu become the military and political elite of Hurrian society. They provide the cavalry force that makes unified military action possible. The Hurrians, in turn, provide the administrative expertise, the agricultural base, the religious traditions, and the population that transforms warrior bands into a functioning state. This cultural synthesis creates something entirely new: a hybrid civilization that combines Hurrian cultural traditions with Indo-Aryan military technology and organizational systems. The Hurrian language remains the common tongue, used in administration, diplomacy, and daily life, but Indo-Aryan terms pervade the military vocabulary. Hurrian gods receive worship alongside Vedic deities. The resulting kingdom will be known by different names to different peoples: Hani-Galbat to the Hurrians and Assyrians, Naharin to the Egyptians, and Mitanni, possibly derived from the Maryannu themselves, to later historians. The timing of this fusion proves crucial. The early 16th century BCE is a period of unusual opportunity in the Near East. The Hittite king Mursili II's assassination in 1595 BCE plunges the Hittite kingdom into decades of internal strife and succession crises. The Hittites withdraw from Syria, leaving a power vacuum. Egypt, though entering its new kingdom, has not yet begun its aggressive expansion into Asia. Assyria remains weak, a minor power overshadowed by the Kassite kingdom of Babylonia. The earliest certain references to the Mitanni Kingdom appear in the 16th century BCE, but the process of state formation likely begins earlier, hidden in the fragmentary historical record of this turbulent period. The foundation of Mitanni power rests on a city whose precise location remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved mysteries. Washukani, the capital of the Mitanni Empire. Ancient texts refer to it frequently. Diplomatic correspondence mentions it. Military campaigns target it. Yet despite over a century of archaeological surveys across northern Syria and southeastern Turkey, Washukani's exact location remains unknown. Most scholars place Washukani somewhere in the upper Kabur River Valley, probably near the headwaters of the Kabur, where it emerges from the foothills of the Taurus Mountains. This location would provide several strategic advantages: access to water in a semi-arid region, a position commanding the trade routes between Mesopotamia and Anatolia, and proximity to the highland areas where the finest horses could be bred. The choice of Washukani as a capital reveals the Mitanni's strategic thinking. Unlike the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, Babylon, Ashur, which had centuries or millennia of history behind them, Washukani appears to be either a new foundation or a previously minor settlement elevated to royal status. This suggests the Mitanni rulers deliberately created a new power center, free from the claims of older cities and their established elites. Our knowledge of the earliest Mitanni rulers remains frustratingly incomplete. Later king lists and fragmentary references in texts from neighboring kingdoms provide glimpses of the dynasty's origins, but significant gaps remain in our understanding. The first Mitanni king, whose name survives in contemporary records, is Kirta, mentioned in texts from approximately 1500 BCE. He appears to rule over a kingdom that already controls significant territory in the Kabur River Valley and has begun establishing its authority over neighboring regions. Following Kirta comes Shutana-Tarfa, a name that will recur in the Mitanni royal line. The name itself reveals the cultural synthesis at the heart of Mitanni civilization. Shutana combines Hurrian and possibly Indo-Aryan elements, reflecting the fusion of peoples that created this kingdom. Under these early rulers, the Mitanni begin the process of territorial expansion that will make them one of the ancient world's great powers. Their strategy involves multiple elements: military conquest of neighboring city-states, diplomatic alliances sealed through marriages and treaties, and the establishment of a system of vassal states that owe allegiance to Washukani. The Mitanni's expansion brings them into conflict with the existing power structures of northern Syria and upper Mesopotamia. Smaller kingdoms and city-states must choose: submit to Mitanni overlordship or face the military consequences. The Mitanni army, spearheaded by its elite chariot corps, proves a compelling argument for submission. To understand the Mitanni's military success, we must understand the technology that makes their conquests possible: the war chariot. The chariot is not a Mitanni invention. Chariots have existed in various forms across the Near East for centuries, but the Mitanni perfect the military application of the light, fast, two-wheeled chariot pulled by a matched pair of highly trained horses, creating a weapons system that dominates Bronze Age warfare. A remarkable text survives from the Mitanni period, a treatise on horse training written by a man named Kikuli. Though the surviving version comes from the Hittite archives, it clearly originates in the Mitanni sphere, and its terminology reveals Indo-Aryan roots. This text provides detailed instructions for training chariot horses over a period of 214 days, including feeding schedules, exercise regimens, and conditioning techniques. The sophistication of Kikuli's methods astonishes modern experts. The training program includes interval training, graduated conditioning, and techniques for building both speed and endurance that would not be out of place in modern equestrian training. The Mitanni understand that successful chariot warfare requires not just any horses, but highly conditioned animals capable of pulling a chariot at high speed over rough terrain while maintaining enough discipline to respond to their handlers even amid the chaos of battle. The Maryannu warriors who crew these chariots form a hereditary military elite. Training begins in childhood. A young Maryannu learns not only to handle horses and manage a chariot, but also to use the composite bow, the advanced weapon that makes the chariot such a deadly platform. The composite bow, constructed from layers of wood, sinew, and horn, possesses both the power and the flexibility needed for effective use from a moving platform. The standard Mitanni chariot carries 2 men, a driver who controls the horses and an archer who fires at enemies. This contrasts with Egyptian chariots, which often carry a 3rd man as a shield bearer. The Mitanni design emphasizes speed and maneuverability over protection. Their tactics involve rapid advances, volleys of arrows at medium range, and quick withdrawals before enemy infantry can close to hand-to-hand combat range. Military might alone does not create an empire. The Mitanni supplement their military conquests with sophisticated diplomatic strategies. The Mitanni establish a system of vassal states that provides them with economic resources, military manpower, and strategic depth. Vassal kings retain their thrones and internal autonomy, but acknowledge Mitanni overlordship, provide tribute, and contribute troops to Mitanni military campaigns. This system proves flexible and effective. It allows the Mitanni to control vast territories without the administrative burden of direct rule over every city and region. Vassal kings have incentives to remain loyal. Mitanni military protection against external enemies, access to the kingdom's trade networks, and the prestige of association with a great power. The Mitanni also pursue a policy of strategic marriages, sending royal princesses to cement alliances with other powers. This practice will later prove particularly important in relations with Egypt, but it begins earlier as a tool for binding together the Mitanni Confederation. By the reign of Maryannu, who ruled sometime in the late 16th or early 15th century BCE, the Mitanni Kingdom has become a major power. Maryannu conquers the important city of Alalakh in Syria, extending Mitanni control toward the Mediterranean coast. He establishes vassal relationships with numerous Syrian city-states and begins to project Mitanni power into Upper Mesopotamia. The stage is set for the Mitanni's greatest era, the period when they will stand as equals with Egypt and dictate terms to the kings of Assyria. The reign of Shaushtatar marks the apogee of Mitanni power and one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in ancient Near Eastern history. Shaushtatar ascends the throne of Mitanni sometime around 1450 BCE, inheriting a kingdom already powerful but not yet dominant in the region. He will transform Mitanni into the supreme power of northern Mesopotamia and Syria through a combination of military brilliance, diplomatic acumen, and strategic vision. His most spectacular achievement comes in his campaign against Assyria. For centuries, Assyria has been one of Mesopotamia's significant powers, controlling the city of Ashur and its surrounding territories. Assyrian merchants have created trading networks stretching into Anatolia. Assyrian kings have styled themselves as equals of other great rulers. Shaushtatar changes everything. The Mitanni army, its chariot corps at the vanguard, strikes deep into Assyrian territory. The campaign culminates in an event that will humiliate Assyria for generations, the sacking of Ashur itself, Assyria's sacred capital and the home of its patron deity. Shaushtatar does not merely conquer Ashur, he deliberately strips it of its most sacred symbols. The doors of Ashur's great temple, worked in precious metals and representing the god's authority, are torn from their hinges. Mitanni soldiers carry these doors across hundreds of miles of desert and plain to Washukani, where they are installed as trophies in the Mitanni capital. The symbolism is unmistakable. Shaushtatar has not just defeated Assyria militarily, he has demonstrated that even Ashur's gods cannot protect the city from Mitanni power. The psychological impact proves as devastating as the military defeat. For the next several generations, Assyria exists as a Mitanni vassal state. Assyrian kings pay tribute to Washukani. When international correspondence occurs, Assyrian rulers must request permission from their Mitanni overlords. The proud Assyrian state, which will one day become the most feared military power in the ancient world, is reduced to provincial status. Even as Shaushtatar humbles Assyria, another drama unfolds to the southwest. One that will define Mitanni foreign policy for the next century and ultimately contribute to the kingdom's survival. Egyptian expansion into Syria under the warrior pharaohs of the 18th dynasty creates an inevitable collision course with Mitanni interests. Egypt seeks to control the Levantine coast and the wealthy trading cities of Syria. The Mitanni already claim many of these cities as vassals. Conflict seems unavoidable. The reigns of the Egyptian pharaohs, Thutmose I and Thutmose III, witness repeated military campaigns into Syria. Egyptian armies push northward, besieging cities, defeating local armies, and establishing Egyptian control over conquered territories. Thutmose III, in particular, proves a formidable military opponent, winning major victories at places like Megiddo. The Mitanni do not surrender their Syrian vassals without resistance. For decades, a pattern emerges. Egyptian armies campaign into Syria during the campaigning season, capturing cities and receiving submissions. Egyptian forces then withdraw to Egypt for the winter. During the Egyptian absence, Mitanni influence reasserts itself, and cities that submitted to Egypt return to the Mitanni sphere. This exhausting pattern of advance and retreat produces no decisive outcome. The Egyptians cannot permanently hold territory so far from their base of operations. The Mitanni cannot drive the Egyptians completely out of Syria. The strategic stalemate gradually convinces both powers that a negotiated settlement serves their interests better than continued warfare. The diplomatic revolution begins during the reign of Shaushtatar's son, Artatama I, and the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose IV. Rather than continuing the costly and inconclusive Syrian wars, the two powers negotiate a formal peace treaty, one of the first such great power agreements in recorded history. The treaty establishes a frontier between Egyptian and Mitanni spheres of influence, generally along a line running through central Syria. Cities to the south acknowledge Egyptian overlordship. Those to the north remain Mitanni vassals. Most remarkably, the agreement is sealed through a royal marriage. An unnamed Mitanni princess becomes the wife of Thutmose IV, cementing the alliance through blood ties. The Egyptian-Mitanni alliance inaugurates a new era in ancient Near Eastern diplomacy. For the first time in history, a system of international relations emerges that resembles modern great power politics. The major kingdoms, Egypt, Mitanni, the Hittites, Babylon, and later Assyria, begin to interact according to shared diplomatic protocols. They address each other as brothers, acknowledging mutual equality even when practical power balances might differ. They exchange embassies, send letters on diplomatic matters, and negotiate through recognized channels. The discovery of the Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found at the Egyptian site of Akhetaten, provides extraordinary insight into this diplomatic world. These clay tablets, written in Akkadian, the international diplomatic language of the era, reveal the complex web of relationships, rivalries, and negotiations that defined great power politics in the late Bronze Age. Mitanni letters to Egypt discuss the exchange of gifts, though both sides understand that gifts are effectively tribute or payment for alliance. Egyptian pharaohs request gold, horses, and luxury goods. Mitanni kings ask for Egyptian gold, which they need to maintain their prestige and reward their vassals. The letters reveal complaints about insufficient gifts, requests for specific items, and the careful calculations of prestige that govern great power relations. Marriage diplomacy plays a crucial role in this system. Mitanni princesses marry Egyptian pharaohs with remarkable frequency. These marriages serve multiple purposes. They cement the alliance, create kinship ties between royal families, and allow Mitanni to claim special status in Egypt. The marriages flow in only one direction. Mitanni princesses go to Egypt, but no Egyptian princesses travel to Mitanni. This one-way flow reflects the relative status of the kingdoms, but also Egyptian reluctance to send royal daughters abroad. While Mitanni focuses on its relationship with Egypt and maintains control over its Assyrian vassals, a new threat grows in the north. The Hittite kingdom, recovered from the succession crises that followed Mursili I's assassination, begins its resurgence under a series of capable rulers. The Hittites possess significant advantages: access to iron deposits and ironworking technology, a defensible homeland in the Anatolian mountains, and a militarized culture that produces formidable armies. Hittite expansion inevitably brings them into conflict with Mitanni interests. The mountainous region of southeastern Anatolia, known as Kizzuwatna, becomes a contested frontier. Some of the cities in northern Syria that have recognized Mitanni overlordship begin to waver, sensing an opportunity to play the great powers against each other. The Mitanni understand the threat. Diplomatic correspondence reveals their efforts to maintain Egyptian support against Hittite pressure. They cultivate alliances with other Anatolian kingdoms that fear Hittite expansion. They fortify their northern frontier and maintain military forces capable of responding to Hittite incursions. For now, the system holds. The Mitanni maintain their position as one of the great powers. Their alliance with Egypt provides security on their southern frontier. Their control of Assyria secures their eastern flank. Their military strength deters major Hittite attacks, but the balance of power in the ancient Near East is about to shift dramatically. The reign of Shutarnadasku, spanning roughly 1400 to 1380 BCE, represents the zenith of Mitanni power and prosperity. Under his rule, the kingdom reaches its greatest territorial extent, commands the respect of all major powers, and achieves a level of wealth and cultural sophistication that makes Washukani one of the Bronze Age's great capitals. Shutarna II inherits a stable, powerful kingdom from his predecessors. The Egyptian alliance remains firm, sealed by multiple royal marriages. Assyria continues as a vassal, providing tribute and military support. The Mitanni sphere of influence extends from the Zagros Mountains in the east, across northern Mesopotamia, through northern Syria, to the approaches to the Mediterranean coast, and into the foothills of the Taurus Mountains in the north. The economy flourishes. The Mitanni control key sections of the trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Mediterranean coast, Anatolia, and Egypt. Caravans carry tin from distant sources in Central Asia, copper from Cyprus and Anatolia, luxury goods from Egypt, and the products of Mesopotamian workshops. The Mitanni treasury collects taxes on this commerce, enriching the royal coffers and funding the kingdom's military and diplomatic activities. Agriculture thrives in the well-watered plains of the Kabur Valley. The Mitanni implement sophisticated irrigation systems, supporting productive farming that feeds a growing population. Archaeological evidence from sites like Nutsi reveals prosperous communities with substantial public buildings, organized around palaces and temples that demonstrate the kingdom's wealth. The Mitanni court becomes a center of cultural synthesis. Hurrian literary traditions blend with influences from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indo-Aryan heritage of the Maryannu elite. Scribes produce texts in multiple languages: Hurrian for internal administration, Akkadian for diplomatic correspondence, and specialized vocabulary preserving Indo-Aryan terms for horses, chariots, and military matters. Shutarna II's diplomatic achievements rival his material prosperity. He navigates the complex world of great power politics with skill, maintaining Mitanni's position through a combination of military strength, strategic marriages, and careful alliance management. The correspondence between Shutarna II and the Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV in later Akhenaten reveals the intimate nature of the Mitanni-Egyptian relationship. In one letter, preserved in the Amarna archive, Shutarnatu addresses the Egyptian king as "my brother," reminding him of the long-standing friendship between their kingdoms and the multiple marriage alliances that bind their families together. These letters provide fascinating glimpses into Bronze Age diplomacy. Shutarnatu requests gold from Egypt, as much as can be sent, explaining that he needs it to complete a temple construction project. He complains about the quality of gold statues sent in previous exchanges, noting that when they were melted down, they contained more copper than gold. He inquires about the health of the Egyptian king and his mother and sends wishes for their well-being. The tone of these exchanges reveals the personal relationships that underlie great power diplomacy in this era. The kings truly see themselves as brothers, bound by ties of marriage and mutual interest. Shutarnatu sends his daughter Kiluhepa to marry Amenhotep III, following in the tradition of earlier Mitanni princesses who have become Egyptian queens. This marriage proves politically significant. Kiluhepa becomes an important figure in the Egyptian court, maintaining communication between Washukani and Thebes. When Amenhotep III later requests another Mitanni princess, Shutarnatu sends his daughter Tadukipa, further strengthening the alliance. The exchange of royal women creates networks of kinship that make war between Egypt and Mitanni almost unthinkable, an achievement of diplomacy that secures the Mitanni southern frontier for decades. The security and prosperity of Shutarnatu's reign enables a remarkable cultural flowering. Mitanni civilization, though it will leave fewer monuments than Egypt or Babylonia, achieves significant artistic and intellectual accomplishments. The Mitanni develop distinctive artistic styles that blend Hurrian traditions with influences from across the Near East. Mitanni seals, small carved stones used to mark documents and goods, display a sophisticated aesthetic, featuring complex geometric patterns, stylized animals, and occasionally scenes of royal hunts or religious ceremonies. These seals spread throughout the region as Mitanni diplomatic gifts and trade goods, becoming markers of Mitanni influence. Pottery production reaches high technical and artistic standards. Mitanni ceramics feature distinctive shapes and decoration, including the famous Nutsi ware with its white-painted designs on dark backgrounds. These vessels range from everyday storage jars to elaborate serving pieces for elite households. Religious architecture flourishes. Though Washukani itself remains undiscovered, excavations at Mitanni provincial centers reveal substantial temple complexes. These structures feature the architectural elements typical of Near Eastern religious buildings: central courtyards, multiple chambers for rituals, and prominent altars, but also show distinctive features that may reflect Mitanni innovations. The Mitanni make significant contributions to the development of Near Eastern religious thought. Hurrian myths and hymns, some preserved in later Hittite copies, reveal sophisticated theological concepts. The Hurrian Song of Release, a mythological narrative, explores themes of divine justice and human responsibility. These texts show that Mitanni intellectuals engaged with the fundamental questions of existence, morality, and the relationship between humans and gods. Yet, even at the height of Shutarnatu's success, factors emerge that will undermine Mitanni stability. The succession question looms large. Shutarnatu has multiple sons, and the question of which will inherit the throne remains unresolved. In the Mitanni system, as in many ancient monarchies, succession is not strictly regulated by primogeniture, the automatic succession of the eldest son. Instead, the king designates his heir, and the choice can be influenced by the abilities of the princes, the political affiliations of their mothers, and the support they command among the Maryannu elite. The powerful position of the Maryannu aristocracy creates structural vulnerabilities. These warrior nobles control the military forces that make Mitanni powerful, but they also possess independent power bases in their estates and retinue. A strong king like Shutana II can manage these nobles, balancing their interests and maintaining his authority. But a succession crisis or a weak ruler might provide opportunities for ambitious nobles to pursue their own agendas. Externally, the strategic environment begins to shift subtly but ominously. In Hatti, the Hittite kingdom, a prince named Suppiluliuma emerges as a military commander of exceptional ability. He leads successful campaigns on the Hittite frontiers, earning prestige and military experience. His ambitions, as will become clear, extend far beyond mere frontier skirmishes. In Assyria, though still a Mitanni vassal, a sense of humiliation and resentment simmers among the Assyrian elite. The memory of Assyrian independence and the shame of the captured temple doors fuel a desire for revenge. For now, Assyria remains too weak to challenge Mitanni overlordship. But Assyrian observers watch carefully, waiting for any sign of Mitanni weakness. The great power diplomatic system, which has maintained peace between Egypt and Mitanni, faces new challenges. In Egypt, Amenhotep IV begins his religious revolution, transforming into Akhenaten and abandoning the traditional Egyptian religion in favor of Aten worship. This internal upheaval will soon distract Egypt from foreign affairs, reducing Egyptian military activity in Syria and potentially leaving Mitanni without its most important ally. All these factors, internal succession problems, the Maryannu power structure, Hittite ambitions, Assyrian resentment, and Egyptian distraction, combine to create a perfect storm that will devastate the Mitanni Kingdom. But for now, in the final years of Shutana II's reign, the kingdom still stands at the height of its power, apparently invincible. The death of Shutana II around 1380 BCE triggers the crisis that will ultimately destroy the Mitanni Kingdom. The succession dispute that follows exposes the fundamental weaknesses in the Mitanni political system and provides the opportunity that Mitanni's enemies have been waiting for. Two princes compete for the throne, Artatama II and Tushratta. The exact relationship between these princes remains debated by historians. Some sources suggest they are brothers, others that Artatama II may be from a collateral branch of the royal family. What is certain is that both command significant support among different factions of the Maryannu aristocracy. Tushratta appears to be Shutana II's designated heir. He has the support of a substantial portion of the Maryannu elite and, crucially, the backing of Egypt. The Egyptian pharaoh, now Akhenaten, has political and personal interests in Tushratta's succession. Tushratta's sister Tadukipa is one of Akhenaten's wives, creating a family connection that Egypt wishes to preserve. Artatama II, however, possesses his own power base. He apparently commands the loyalty of different Maryannu factions, possibly those from the eastern territories of the kingdom. Some scholars suggest he may have presented himself as a more traditional candidate, opposed to the close Egyptian connection that Tushratta represents. The succession dispute erupts into violence. Civil war tears through the Mitanni Kingdom as the two factions clash. Cities must choose which claimant to support. Maryannu warriors who have fought together against external enemies now face each other in fratricidal combat. The sophisticated administration that has governed the kingdom fragments as different regions align with different claimants. A letter from Tushratta to Akhenaten, preserved in the Amarna archive, provides a glimpse into the violence of this period. Tushratta writes that he has overcome his enemies and secured the throne, but the letter's tone suggests the struggle has been severe and that stability remains fragile. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma IV, now ruling from the Hittite capital of Hattusa, observes the Mitanni civil war with intense interest. Here, finally, is the opportunity he has been preparing for throughout his military career. Suppiluliuma is arguably the most capable military commander and strategic thinker of the Late Bronze Age. He understands that Mitanni, despite its current crisis, remains a formidable opponent if it can reunify. His strategy, therefore, aims not merely to defeat Mitanni armies, but to permanently shatter Mitanni power, carving up the kingdom and redistributing its territories to ensure it can never threaten Hittite interests again. The Hittite king does not immediately invade Mitanni proper. Instead, he begins with a brilliant strategic maneuver. He launches what becomes known as the Syrian campaign, a massive offensive that sweeps through northern Syria, targeting the Mitanni vassal states that control the approaches to the Mediterranean coast. The timing proves perfect. The Mitanni Kingdom, consumed by civil war, cannot organize an effective response. Egyptian military forces, which might have come to the aid of Mitanni's Syrian vassals, remain in Egypt as Akhenaten focuses on his religious reforms rather than Asian politics. One by one, the cities that have paid tribute to Washukani for generations fall to Hittite arms. Aleppo, one of the great cities of northern Syria, falls to Suppiluliuma. Alalak, which Mitanni armies conquered generations earlier, returns to the Hittite sphere. The city-states of the Orontes Valley, which formed the buffer between Mitanni and Egyptian zones of influence, submit to the Hittite conqueror. Suppiluliuma's campaign achieves its strategic objectives with remarkable efficiency. Within a few campaigning seasons, he strips away the entire western wing of the Mitanni Empire. The territories that provided wealth through trade, agricultural production, and tribute are now Hittite vassals. The buffer zone that protected Washukani from Western threats no longer exists. And perhaps most damaging psychologically, the Mitanni have been unable to protect their vassals, undermining the prestige that is essential to maintaining an empire in the Bronze Age world. Tushratta, having apparently won the civil war against Artatama II, faces a kingdom in crisis. Territory has been lost, prestige damaged, and the kingdom's military resources exhausted by internal conflict. His response reveals both his desperation and his diplomatic sophistication. The Amarna letters preserve a series of messages from Tushratta to Akhenaten that paint a vivid picture of Mitanni's deteriorating situation. In these letters, Tushratta adopts the traditional language of great power diplomacy, addressing the Egyptian king as "my brother" and invoking the long history of Mitanni-Egyptian friendship. But beneath the diplomatic formulas, the urgency of Mitanni's situation becomes clear. Tushratta reminds Akhenaten of the family connections between them. Tushratta's sister is one of Akhenaten's wives, making them brothers-in-law as well as allied sovereigns. He recalls the gifts exchanged between their fathers, the mutual support that has characterized the alliance, and the benefits that both kingdoms have derived from their partnership. Then comes the request. Tushratta needs Egyptian gold, and he needs it urgently. Gold represents more than mere wealth in Bronze Age diplomacy. It is the currency of prestige, the means by which a king demonstrates his power and rewards his supporters. Tushratta requires gold to maintain the loyalty of the Maryannu aristocracy, to fund the army that must defend against further Hittite aggression, and to shore up his position among the remaining vassal states. But Akhenaten, absorbed in his religious revolution and the construction of his new capital at Akhetaten, proves an unreliable ally. Some Egyptian gold arrives, but apparently not in the quantities Tushratta requests. More critically, no Egyptian military forces march north to confront the Hittites. The alliance that has been Mitanni's strategic foundation for nearly a century fails at the moment of greatest need. Tushratta also attempts to maintain his authority over the remaining Mitanni vassals. Letters from this period reveal him trying to prevent individual city-states from making separate peace with the Hittites. threatening consequences for those who betray Mitanni overlordship and promising rewards to those who remain loyal. But these communications increasingly sound like pleas rather than commands from a great power. As Mitanni reels from civil war and Hittite aggression, another enemy perceives opportunity. In Ashur, the Assyrians have waited for generations, paying tribute to Washukani, enduring the humiliation of vassal status, never forgetting the sacred temple doors that Shaushtatar carried away as trophies. The Assyrian king Ashur-uballit-Worm, who ascends the throne around 1365 BCE, proves to be a ruler of vision and ambition. He understands that Mitanni's crisis offers Assyria a once-in-a-generation chance to restore Assyrian independence and begin reclaiming Assyrian greatness. Ashur-uballit begins cautiously. He stops sending tribute to Washukani, a symbolic declaration of independence. Mitanni, embroiled in its struggle with the Hittites and internal instability, cannot spare the forces to punish this defiance. Assyrian independence becomes de facto reality. But Ashur-uballit thinks beyond mere independence. He initiates direct diplomatic contact with Egypt, bypassing Mitanni entirely and treating with Egypt as an equal great power. In a remarkable letter preserved in the Amarna archive, Ashur-uballit addresses Akhenaten as brother, adopting the language of great power diplomacy and essentially claiming that Assyria has joined the club of major kingdoms. This diplomatic initiative provokes fury from Tushratta. In his own letters to Egypt, Tushratta refers contemptuously to Assyria as his vassal and demands that Egypt not treat with the Assyrian king independently. But the very fact that Tushratta must make such demands reveals how much Mitanni power has declined. The great power that once dictated terms to Assyria now cannot prevent its former vassal from conducting independent diplomacy. Ashur-uballit's letters to Egypt request gold, just as Tushratta does, but they also offer something valuable: trade goods from Assyrian territories, including the famous Assyrian horses. Egypt, always in need of quality horses for its chariot forces, finds the Assyrian offer attractive. The triangle of relationships, Mitanni claiming overlordship of Assyria, Assyria asserting independence and great power status, and Egypt uncertain which to support, reflects the chaos into which the formerly stable great power system has fallen. The Bronze Age international order that maintained peace for generations is disintegrating, and Mitanni, once one of its anchors, cannot prevent the collapse. Suppiluliuma, having secured his Syrian conquests, turns his attention to the Mitanni heartland itself. The second phase of his campaign aims at nothing less than the destruction of Mitanni as an independent power. Around 1365 BCE, Hittite armies cross the Euphrates River and strike directly toward the core Mitanni territories. This is not a raid or a limited border conflict. This is an existential assault on the Mitanni Kingdom itself. The Hittite objective is clear: to capture or destroy Washukani and to break the power of the kingdom that has blocked Hittite expansion for over a century. The Mitanni army, though weakened by civil war and the loss of Syrian territories, musters to defend the homeland. The Maryannu chariot corps, the elite force that has made Mitanni military reputation for generations, takes the field. Infantry levied from the cities of the Kabur Valley marches to join the royal forces. Tushratta personally commands the army, staking everything on a decisive confrontation with the Hittite invaders. The sources provide frustratingly few details about the actual battles. We know that fighting occurs across the Mitanni heartland. We know that Tushratta's forces win some engagements. He claims victories in his letters to Egypt, but the overall trajectory of the campaign favors the Hittites. Suppiluliuma demonstrates the military genius that makes him one of the ancient world's great commanders. He divides his forces, using mobile columns to pin down Mitanni armies, while other units strike at cities and supply centers. He exploits the Hittite advantage in infantry, using his foot soldiers to besiege fortified positions while his chariots screen against Mitanni counterattacks. The Hittite advance drives toward Washukani itself. The approach of enemy forces to the Mitanni capital represents a catastrophe unprecedented in the kingdom's history. Never before has a foreign army threatened the city that symbolizes Mitanni power. The psychological impact on the Mitanni population and elite cannot be overstated. Whether Washukani actually falls to the Hittites remains uncertain. The sources are ambiguous. Some texts suggest the Hittites capture the city, others imply that Tushratta manages to prevent its fall. What is certain is that even if Washukani survives, the kingdom does not. The Mitanni state fractures under the Hittite onslaught. The Hittite offensive shatters the Mitanni kingdom into pieces. The unity that has made Mitanni powerful disintegrates as different regions and cities pursue their own survival strategies. In the western territories already conquered by Suppiluliuma, the former Mitanni vassals integrate into the Hittite Empire. Hittite administrators arrive to organize tribute collection. Hittite garrisons occupy strategic cities. The population must now swear loyalty to Hattusa rather than Washukani. In the eastern territories, Assyria moves aggressively to fill the power vacuum. Ashur-ubalit's armies push westward from Assyrian heartland, occupying cities that had paid tribute to Mitanni for generations. The Assyrians are not conquerors in the same sense as the Hittites. Many of these territories have cultural and economic connections to Assyria, and their incorporation into an expanding Assyrian state proceeds with less resistance than might be expected. Artatama II, the rival claimant who lost the earlier civil war to Tushratta, re-emerges in this chaos. With Hittite backing, he establishes himself as king over a rump Mitanni state in the eastern territories. This Mitanni, under Artatama II, is, in reality, a Hittite puppet state, a nominally independent kingdom that follows Hittite foreign policy and provides Suppiluliuma with a tool to legitimate Hittite control over former Mitanni territories. Tushratta, meanwhile, tries to maintain his authority over whatever remnants of the kingdom he still controls, but his position becomes increasingly untenable. The loss of territory means loss of revenue. The loss of revenue means inability to pay and supply the army. The inability to maintain military forces means further territorial losses in a vicious spiral of decline. The Maryannu aristocracy, whose support is essential to any Mitanni king, begins to fragment. Some nobles flee westward with their retinues, seeking employment in the armies of Egypt or the surviving Syrian city-states. Others make their peace with the new Hittite overlords, offering their chariot expertise in exchange for maintaining their estates and status. Still others support Artatama II's Hittite-backed regime, calculating that a Mitanni puppet state under Hittite protection offers better prospects than continued loyalty to Tushratta. The end, when it comes for Tushratta, arrives not on the battlefield, but through betrayal. Around 1350 BCE, Tushratta is assassinated. The exact circumstances remain murky, but the sources suggest the plot involves his own son, possibly named Shatiwaza, or members of the Mitanni court who have concluded that Tushratta's continued rule offers no path forward for the kingdom. The assassination of Tushratta marks the effective end of the independent Mitanni Kingdom. The state that has stood as one of the great powers of the Bronze Age for over 2 centuries ceases to exist as a meaningful political entity. Its territories are divided among the Hittites, the Assyrians, and the puppet regime of Artatama II. Its elite disperses. Its capital, Washukani, if it has not already fallen, soon fades from history. Perhaps destroyed, perhaps simply abandoned as its population flees the chaos. One prince survives the catastrophe, Shatiwaza, son of Tushratta. His story provides a fascinating coda to the Mitanni collapse. Shatiwaza flees to the Hittite court, presenting himself to Suppiluliuma as a refugee prince seeking assistance to reclaim his patrimony. Suppiluliuma, in a masterful display of political manipulation, welcomes Shatiwaza. The Hittite king arranges for Shatiwaza to marry a Hittite princess, Suppiluliuma's own daughter, and supports his claim to the Mitanni throne. But the restoration that Suppiluliuma engineers is a restoration in name only. A treaty between Suppiluliuma and Shatiwaza, preserved in the Hittite archives, reveals the reality of this arrangement. The treaty is one of the most complete diplomatic documents surviving from the Bronze Age, and it provides extraordinary insight into Hittite imperial strategy. The treaty stipulates that Shatiwaza rules as king of Mitanni, but as a vassal completely subordinate to Hittite authority. He must provide military forces when Hatti requires them. He cannot conduct independent foreign policy. He must allow Hittite administrators to supervise the collection of tribute. He rules over a severely truncated territory, essentially only the core regions around the Kabur Valley that have not been absorbed directly into either Hittite or Assyrian territory. The treaty also includes a fascinating historical preamble in which Suppiluliuma recounts his campaigns against Mitanni, describing how he defeated Tushratta and conquered Mitanni territories. This preamble serves both as propaganda, establishing Hittite military superiority, and as a legal justification for Hittite overlordship. While the Hittites established their puppet Mitanni state in the west, Assyria ruthlessly exploits Mitanni's collapse to restore and expand Assyrian power in the east. Ashur-uballit I's successor, Enlil-nirari, continues the aggressive expansion. Assyrian armies campaign westward, conquering cities and territories that have been Mitanni vassals or directly controlled by Washukani for generations. The Assyrian military, hardened by years of suppression under Mitanni overlordship, proves formidable. They have learned from the Mitanni, adopting chariot warfare techniques, improving their military organization, and developing the aggressive military culture that will characterize Assyria for the next 7 centuries. The regions conquered by Assyria include some of the most economically valuable territories in Upper Mesopotamia. Control of these areas provides Assyria with agricultural surplus, trade revenue, and population for military recruitment. The Assyrian state, which only a generation earlier paid tribute to Mitanni, now rivals the Hittites as a major regional power. Assyrian expansion inevitably brings conflict with the Hittite sphere of influence. The two powers clash over control of territories in the borderlands between their expanding empires. These conflicts remain limited for now. Neither Assyria nor Hatti desires all-out war when both are still consolidating their gains, but the pattern is established. Assyria and Hatti will compete for dominance in the territories that once formed the Mitanni Kingdom, and this competition will shape Near Eastern politics for generations to come. The Assyrian kings adopt a deliberate policy of erasing Mitanni from memory. They present their expansion not as conquest of foreign territory, but as the restoration of ancient Assyrian dominions. In their inscriptions and royal propaganda, the Assyrian kings claim that the territories they conquer have always rightfully belonged to Assyria, and they are merely taking back what was stolen during the period of humiliation under Mitanni overlordship. This revisionist narrative serves important purposes. It legitimates Assyrian conquests, it provides continuity with the Assyrian past, and it frames expansion as restoration rather than aggression. But it also contributes to the historical erasure of Mitanni. As Assyrian power grows and Assyrian scribes write the history of the region, the Mitanni Kingdom increasingly disappears from the historical record, reduced to a brief interlude between periods of Assyrian greatness rather than recognized as the major power it actually was. The Mitanni state that limps forward under Shatiwaza and his Hittite-backed successors bears little resemblance to the great power that once commanded respect from Egypt and dictated terms to Assyria. It is a puppet kingdom, maintained by Hittite power for Hittite purposes, ruling over a fraction of the territories that once acknowledged Washukani's authority. Yet even in this diminished state, the kingdom retains some significance. The Hittites maintain the fiction of Mitanni independence because it serves their interests. A nominally independent Mitanni buffer state provides a useful barrier between Hittite and Assyrian territories, reducing the risk of direct Hittite-Assyrian conflict. It allows the Hittites to claim they have restored the legitimate Mitanni dynasty rather than simply conquering the region. And it provides a mechanism for indirect rule that costs the Hittites less than direct administration would require. Shatiwaza and his successors govern from what remains of the Mitanni heartland. Whether Washukani serves as their capital or whether that city has been destroyed and abandoned, replaced by another administrative center, remains uncertain. Archaeological excavations at sites like Tel Fekheria and Tel Brak reveal cities that continue to function during this period, but with clear evidence of declining prosperity and population compared to the earlier height of Mitanni power. The economy contracts dramatically. The loss of the wealthy Syrian territories and the productive regions conquered by Assyria means far less revenue flows into the royal treasury. The trade routes that once enriched Mitanni now enrich its conquerors. The tribute that vassal states once paid to Washukani now goes to Hattusa and Ashur. The Maryannu aristocracy, once the kingdom's military and political elite, exists in reduced circumstances. Those who remain in the puppet kingdom serve at Hittite pleasure. They can no longer claim the independence and prestige they once enjoyed. Many of the great Maryannu families have disappeared, some wiped out in the wars, others dispersed as refugees, still others absorbed into Hittite or Assyrian service. The puppet Mitanni state survives for approximately 50 years, but it exists under constant pressure from an increasingly aggressive Assyria. The Assyrian kings, Adad-nirari, Ophi, and Shalmaneser Chai, ruling in the late 14th and early 13th centuries BCE, pursue aggressive expansionist policies. They see the remaining Mitanni territories as rightfully Assyrian, and they possess the military power to enforce their claims. Adad-nirari I, who reigns from approximately 1307 to 1275 BCE, proves particularly aggressive. His annals, which survive in fragmentary Assyrian inscriptions, document his campaigns against the remaining Mitanni kingdom. He describes conquering cities, defeating Mitanni armies, and incorporating territories into the Assyrian realm. The puppet Mitanni kings cannot resist Assyrian military pressure without Hittite support. But the Hittites, facing their own challenges, conflicts with Egypt in Syria, problems on their Anatolian frontiers, and the growing burden of administering their expanded empire, cannot always provide the military assistance that their Mitanni vassals require. A pattern emerges. Assyrian armies campaign into Mitanni territory during periods when Hittite attention is directed elsewhere. They conquer cities and extract tribute. If the Hittites respond militarily, the Assyrians may temporarily withdraw or accept a negotiated settlement. But then, when Hittite attention shifts again, Assyrian armies return, consolidating their gains and pushing further west. The Mitanni population suffers terribly during these conflicts. Armies marching through the countryside strip resources, damage agricultural infrastructure, and displace populations. Cities change hands multiple times, with each conquest bringing looting, killing, and social disruption. The prosperity that the region knew during the independent Mitanni Kingdom becomes a fading memory. The end of even the puppet Mitanni state comes during the reign of the Assyrian king, Shalmaneser I, who rules from approximately 1274 to 1245 BCE. Shalmaneser is one of the great Assyrian warrior kings, a ruler who transforms Assyria from a regional power into an empire that dominates Upper Mesopotamia and threatens Syria. Shalmaneser's inscriptions document his campaigns against what he terms Hanigalbat, the Assyrian name for the Mitanni territories. In a series of campaigns during the 1260s BCE, Shalmaneser systematically conquers the remaining Mitanni Kingdom, incorporating its territories directly into the Assyrian state. The final Mitanni king, whose name may be Shatuara II, though the sources are confusing and contradictory on this point, attempts resistance. He apparently seeks Hittite assistance, hoping that the Hittites will intervene to preserve their buffer state. But the Hittites, now dealing with the aftermath of their conflicts with Egypt and facing new threats on their northern frontiers, cannot or will not commit sufficient forces to save Mitanni. Assyrian armies overrun the Mitanni heartland. One by one, the cities fall. Shalmaneser's inscriptions claim he conquers 14,400 people and immense amounts of booty, numbers that, even if exaggerated in typical ancient Near Eastern fashion, suggest a major campaign resulting in substantial devastation. The last remnants of Mitanni political independence disappear. Shalmaneser incorporates the conquered territories into the Assyrian provincial system. Assyrian governors replace local rulers. Assyrian garrisons occupy strategic positions. The population must now pay tribute to Ashur, work on royal building projects, and provide soldiers for the Assyrian army. Shalmaneser claims a particularly symbolic victory. He recovers the doors of Ashur's temple, the same doors that Shaushtatar had carried away as trophies over a century earlier. The Assyrian king has the doors returned to Ashur and reinstalled in the temple, symbolically reversing the humiliation that Assyria suffered at the height of Mitanni power. The act serves as powerful propaganda, demonstrating that Assyria has not only regained independence, but has utterly defeated the power that once humbled it. Even after Shalmaneser's conquest, resistance continues sporadically. The sources mention various rebels and local leaders who attempt to throw off Assyrian control and restore some form of Mitanni independence. These revolts typically follow a familiar pattern. When Assyrian attention is diverted elsewhere, local leaders declare independence or reduce tribute obligations. Assyrian armies eventually return, suppress the revolt with extreme violence, and reimpose Assyrian authority. Shalmaneser's successors continue to campaign in the former Mitanni territories, suggesting ongoing resistance. But these are no longer conflicts between kingdoms. They are suppression of provincial rebellions. The Mitanni Kingdom, as a political entity, no longer exists. Some scholars identify mentions of Hanigalbat in later Assyrian texts, suggesting that a sense of regional identity persisted even after political independence ended. The term may have continued to designate a geographical region rather than an independent kingdom, similar to how we might speak of Mesopotamia or Syria today, without implying political unity. The Hurrian population, the foundation of Mitanni civilization, gradually assimilates into the broader Assyrian state. Hurrian language continues to be spoken in some areas, but Akkadian, the Semitic language of Assyria, becomes increasingly dominant. Hurrian religious traditions persist, with gods like Teshub continuing to receive worship, but often now under Mesopotamian names or as part of the broader Assyrian religious system. The Maryannu elite, the warrior aristocracy whose chariot expertise made Mitanni military reputation, disappears as a distinct class. Some families maintain their status by entering Assyrian service, but they lose their specific identity as Maryannu. The sophisticated horse breeding and chariot training traditions they developed spread throughout the Near East, adopted by various armies, but no longer associated with a specifically Mitanni identity. By the early 13th century BCE, approximately 250 years after the founding of the kingdom and less than a century after its apogee under Shutarna II, Mitanni has ceased to exist. The capital of Washukani, wherever it was located, lies abandoned or has been completely destroyed, its ruins eventually buried beneath centuries of accumulated soil and sand. The great power that once stood as an equal to Egypt and commanded respect from all the kingdoms of the Near East has vanished from the political map. The conquest of Mitanni transforms Assyria from a regional power into one of the ancient world's great empires. The territories that once formed the Mitanni heartland become the foundation for Assyrian expansion that will eventually create the largest empire the ancient Near East has yet seen. The Assyrian kings who follow Shalmaneser Ashur, Tukulti-Ninurta Shun, Tiglath-Pileser-Pen, and their successors build on the conquests in the former Mitanni territories. These regions provide Assyria with crucial resources: agricultural surplus from the fertile plains, control of trade routes, and population for military recruitment and labor on royal projects. The Assyrian military machine, already formidable, becomes even more powerful by incorporating techniques and personnel from the conquered Mitanni territories. Assyrian chariot forces, trained using methods originally developed by the Maryannu, become among the finest in the Near East. Assyrian cavalry, soldiers fighting on horseback without chariots, a relatively new military innovation, benefits from the horse-breeding expertise that the Mitanni had perfected. The Assyrian Empire adopts a more centralized administrative system than the Mitanni ever achieved. Where Mitanni relied on vassal states with considerable autonomy, Assyria imposes direct provincial administration. Where Mitanni kings cultivated personal relationships with vassal rulers and maintained their empire through prestige and military reputation, Assyrian rulers used systematic deportations, military garrisons, and brutal suppression of resistance to maintain control. This Assyrian system proves more durable than Mitanni's network of vassals. When later, Assyrian power temporarily declines during the late 12th and early 11th centuries BCE, a period known as the Assyrian Dark Age, the empire eventually recovers and resumes expansion. In contrast, when Mitanni faced crisis, the kingdom shattered and could never be restored. For the Hittite Empire, the destruction of Mitanni achieves important strategic objectives, but also creates new challenges. The Hittite conquests in Syria and Upper Mesopotamia expand Hittite territory significantly, bringing wealthy regions under Hittite control. The elimination of Mitanni as a rival removes a power that had blocked Hittite expansion for generations. The establishment of puppet regimes and eventually direct administration in former Mitanni territories extends Hittite influence to the borders of Assyria. But these gains come with costs. The expanded Hittite Empire stretches Hittite military and administrative resources. Maintaining control over the Syrian territories requires constant military presence to deter Egyptian ambitions and suppress local rebellions. The Hittite heartland in Anatolia faces its own security challenges, including threats from peoples in the Balkans and pressures from groups along the Black Sea coast. Most significantly, the destruction of Mitanni brings the Hittites into direct confrontation with Assyria. Where the Mitanni Kingdom once served as a buffer between Hittite and Assyrian spheres of influence, now Hittite and Assyrian territories share a frontier. Border disputes become inevitable. Competition for influence over the smaller kingdoms in the region creates recurring tensions. Conflicts between Hittite and Assyria during the 13th century BCE remain limited. Neither empire wants all-out war that might benefit Egyptian or Babylonian rivals. But the competition constrains both empires' freedom of action and contributes to the military and economic burdens they face. The Hittite Empire will ultimately collapse around 1200 BCE during the crisis known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, a catastrophic period when multiple civilizations around the Eastern Mediterranean face simultaneous challenges, including invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples, internal rebellions, environmental stress, and systemic failures in the interconnected Bronze Age economic system. While the destruction of Mitanni decades earlier does not directly cause the Hittite collapse, it contributes to the overextension that makes the Hittite Empire vulnerable when the crisis comes. The collapse of Mitanni has profound consequences for Egypt, the kingdom's oldest and most important ally. The Egyptian-Mitanni alliance, which has provided stability in the Near East for nearly a century, dissolves not through deliberate Egyptian abandonment, but through Egyptian distraction and inability to project sufficient military power when Mitanni needs it most. The Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, consumed by his religious revolution and the construction of his new capital at Akhetaten, reduces Egyptian military activity in Syria precisely when Mitanni faces its existential crisis. The Amarna letters document the increasingly desperate pleas from Mitanni and from Syrian city-states loyal to Egypt, warning of Hittite expansion and requesting Egyptian military intervention. But the help never comes in sufficient force. Egyptian armies do not march north to confront Suppiluliuma. Egyptian gold arrives in quantities insufficient to maintain Mitanni's position. The alliance that has been the cornerstone of Near Eastern diplomacy for generations fails at the critical moment. The consequences for Egypt prove severe. With Mitanni destroyed, the buffer between Egyptian and Hittite spheres of influence disappears. Within a few years, Egypt and Hatti find themselves in direct military conflict over control of Syria. This competition culminates in the famous Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, where the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II fights the Hittite king Muwatalli Set to an inconclusive draw, one of the best documented battles of the ancient world. The Egyptians eventually negotiate a peace treaty with the Hittites, the famous Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty of 1259 BCE, one of the earliest surviving international peace agreements. But this treaty comes after decades of costly warfare that drains both empires' resources. The stability that the Egyptian-Mitanni alliance once provided cannot be replicated in the more volatile environment of direct Egyptian-Hittite confrontation. Egyptian royal correspondence from the post-Mitanni period shows nostalgia for the earlier system. Letters reference the time when Mitanni was our brother and recall the peaceful relations that characterized that era. But nostalgia cannot resurrect a vanished kingdom. Though Mitanni disappears as a political entity, its cultural influence persists in surprising ways throughout the ancient Near East. Hurrian language, though it declines after Mitanni's fall, continues to be spoken in various regions for centuries. Hurrian religious texts, particularly myths and hymns, are copied and preserved in Hittite archives where they influence Hittite religious literature. Some Hurrian deities become incorporated into the pantheons of neighboring peoples. Teshub, the Hurrian storm god, appears in various forms across the Near East, and the goddess Hepet continues to receive worship in multiple cultural contexts. The military innovations associated with the Mitanni, particularly the sophisticated chariot warfare techniques and horse training methods, spread throughout the ancient world. The Kikuli text on horse training, though preserved in Hittite copies, influences equestrian practice across the Near East and beyond. Later, cavalry forces, from Assyria to Persia to the Greek world, benefit from techniques first perfected in the Mitanni sphere. Artistic styles and craftsmanship traditions that developed during the Mitanni period persist in the regions that once formed the kingdom. Archaeological excavations reveal continuities in pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and architectural features that span the transition from Mitanni rule to Assyrian or Hittite control. Local artisans continue practicing their crafts under new political masters, maintaining cultural traditions even as political structures change. Perhaps most surprisingly, the memory of Mitanni persists in later historical traditions. Assyrian historical texts, even those written centuries after Mitanni's fall, sometimes reference the kingdom as an example of past greatness that Assyria surpassed. Biblical texts may contain indirect references to the Mitanni period, though scholarly debate continues about the precise connections between biblical narratives and historical Mitanni territories. The diplomatic protocols and practices that developed during the Mitanni era, the system of great power relations, marriage diplomacy, the use of Akkadian as an international language, and the formal equality expressed through the brotherhood terminology continue to shape Near Eastern international relations for centuries. The diplomatic revolution that occurred when Mitanni and Egypt established their alliance creates patterns that persist even after both kingdoms have vanished. The greatest archaeological mystery of Mitanni civilization remains unsolved: the location of Washukani, the kingdom's capital city. For over a century, archaeologists have searched for Washukani across northern Syria and southeastern Turkey. Ancient texts provide tantalizing clues, descriptions of the city's location, references to its temples and palaces, accounts of military campaigns that mention distances from Washukani to other known sites. Yet, despite extensive surveys using both traditional methods and modern technology, including satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, the capital remains undiscovered. Why has Washukani proven so elusive? Several factors contribute to the mystery. First, the political situation in the regions where Washukani most likely existed, northern Syria, the Turkish-Syrian border area, and southeastern Turkey, has often made systematic archaeological work difficult or impossible. Decades of political instability, border tensions, and armed conflicts have limited access to potential sites. Second, if Washukani was abandoned after Mitanni's fall rather than continuously occupied, later building may not mark its location. Many ancient cities remain identifiable because later peoples built on the same sites, creating tells, artificial mounds formed by successive layers of occupation. But a city that was abandoned and never reoccupied might leave less obvious surface traces. Third, the deliberate destruction of Washukani, whether by Hittite conquerors, Assyrian armies, or even by fleeing Mitanni populations, might have been so thorough that identifying the ruins proves challenging. Ancient armies sometimes razed defeated cities, dismantling walls, burning buildings, and even filling in wells to ensure the site could not easily be reoccupied. Most scholars place Washukani somewhere in the upper Kabur River Valley, probably in the region where the Kabur emerges from the foothills of the Taurus Mountains. Several sites in this region have been proposed as potential locations for the capital. Tel Fekeriye, located near the Kabur headwaters, has produced inscriptions and artifacts from the Mitanni period. Some scholars argue its size and strategic location make it a candidate for Washukani, though others contend the archaeological evidence doesn't support identification as the capital. Tel Mozan, the ancient city of Urkesh, was an important Hurrian religious center and may have played a significant role in Mitanni administration. However, Urkesh appears to have been a sacred city rather than the political capital. Sites in southeastern Turkey, particularly in regions that are now difficult to access due to modern conflicts, remain potential candidates. The construction of dams in the region has also complicated matters. Some potential sites may now lie beneath reservoir waters. Though Washukani eludes discovery, archaeological work at other Mitanni period sites provides rich insights into the kingdom's civilization. Excavations at Nusi, in modern Iraq, have produced thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting daily life in a Mitanni provincial center. These texts reveal the kingdom's administrative systems, legal practices, economic activities, and social structures, We learn about land ownership, slavery, marriage contracts, adoption practices, and business transactions, providing a window into Mitanni society that goes far beyond the political and military history preserved in royal inscriptions. The Nutsi archive documents the multi-ethnic character of Mitanni society. Personal names in the tablets reveal Hurrian, Semitic, and Indo-Aryan elements coexisting in the same communities. Legal documents show people of different ethnic backgrounds interacting in economic transactions, suggesting a relatively integrated society rather than rigid ethnic hierarchies. Excavations at Alalak in modern Turkey near the Syrian border have revealed a city that changed hands multiple times during the Mitanni period. Archaeological layers show destruction events followed by rebuilding, physical evidence of the political instability that characterized the Late Bronze Age. The Alalak tablets include correspondence with Mitanni kings, providing direct evidence of the relationship between the capital and provincial centers. Tel Brak, one of the ancient world's earliest urban centers, shows continued occupation during the Mitanni period. Excavations reveal substantial public buildings, including what may be an administrative complex from the Mitanni era. The site's long history, occupation extends back to the 4th millennium BCE, demonstrates the deep historical roots of urbanization in the region that became the Mitanni heartland. Artifacts from these and other sites reveal Mitanni material culture. Distinctive pottery styles, including the famous Nutsi ware with its white-painted decoration on dark surfaces, allow archaeologists to identify Mitanni period occupations across a wide geographical area. Cylinder seals bearing Mitanni names and motifs demonstrate the artistic sophistication of Mitanni craftsmen and the reach of Mitanni trade networks. Such seals have been found as far away as Egypt and the Aegean world. Weapons and military equipment from Mitanni contexts provide physical evidence of the kingdom's military capabilities. Bronze arrowheads, spear points, and armor fragments demonstrate the metallurgical expertise that supported Mitanni armies. Horse equipment, including bits and harness fittings, offers tangible evidence of the horse culture that was central to Mitanni identity. Understanding Mitanni civilization faces another significant challenge: the Hurrian language itself. Hurrian is a linguistic isolate. It has no clear relationship to any other known language family. It is neither Semitic, like Akkadian, Hebrew, or Arabic, nor Indo-European, like Hittite, Greek, or Sanskrit. This linguistic isolation makes decipherment particularly challenging. Scholars cannot use comparative methods that work for languages with known relatives. The decipherment of Hurrian has proceeded gradually over the past century. Early breakthroughs came through bilingual texts, documents written in both Hurrian and better understood languages like Akkadian or Hittite. By comparing the two versions, scholars could determine the meanings of Hurrian words and begin understanding the language's grammar. The Mitanni letter from the Amarna archive, a letter from Tushratta to Amenhotep III written in Hurrian, provided crucial material for linguistic study. Though this single letter doesn't contain enough text to fully unlock the language, it offered valuable data about Hurrian vocabulary and grammatical structures. More extensive Hurrian texts preserved in Hittite archives have proven essential for linguistic progress. The Hittites copied numerous Hurrian religious texts, myths, and rituals, providing much more extensive Hurrian material than survives from Mitanni sites themselves. Ironically, we know more about Hurrian literature from texts preserved by Mitanni's conquerors than from the Mitanni heartland. Modern scholars have made substantial progress in understanding Hurrian. We can now read many Hurrian texts with reasonable confidence, understand the language's basic grammar, and compile Hurrian dictionaries. But significant uncertainties remain, particularly regarding subtle meanings, idiomatic expressions, and specialized vocabulary. Beyond the political history and archaeological evidence, the most compelling aspects of Mitanni civilization emerge in the human stories preserved in ancient texts, glimpses of individual lives lived during this vanished kingdom's rise and fall. The Nutsi tablets provide numerous such glimpses. We read of a man named Tehip-Tilla, a wealthy landowner who engaged in complex business transactions, acquired property through loans and foreclosures, and built a substantial estate. His archive of personal documents reveals the ambitions, strategies, and daily concerns of a provincial Mitanni notable. We encounter women of the Mitanni period, some named in legal documents as property owners and parties to contracts, suggesting they possessed more legal rights than in some neighboring societies. Elite women appear in diplomatic correspondence, particularly the Mitanni princesses who married Egyptian pharaohs and maintained their own diplomatic correspondence with their home kingdom. The letters from Mitanni kings to Egyptian pharaohs reveal personality and emotion. Tushrata's correspondence shows his pride in Mitanni greatness, his anxiety about Hittite threats, his frustration when Egyptian gold arrives in insufficient quantities, and his genuine affection for family members in the Egyptian court. These are not merely diplomatic documents, but personal letters that reveal the human being behind the royal title. The Kikuli horse training text, though technical, reveals the dedication and expertise of Mitanni horse trainers. The detailed, methodical approach to conditioning chariot horses over 214 days demonstrates profound knowledge of animal physiology and training psychology, expertise that could only develop through generations of careful observation and experimentation. Even in the records of Mitanni's destruction, human stories emerge. The flight of Shatiwaza to the Hittite court represents one man's determination to survive catastrophe and attempt restoration of his family's fortune, even if it means accepting vassal status to his father's enemies. The Assyrian accounts of deportations and conquests, though written from the conqueror's perspective, hint at the tragedies of populations displaced, families separated, and communities destroyed. These human stories remind us that Mitanni was not merely a political entity marked on maps, but a civilization of real people. Warriors who trained horses and maneuvered chariots, farmers who worked the fields of the Kabur Valley, merchants who conducted trade across vast distances, artisans who created beautiful objects, scribes who recorded transactions and composed letters, kings who negotiated with foreign powers and made decisions that shaped history. The destruction of Mitanni creates a power vacuum in Upper Mesopotamia and northern Syria that reshapes the political geography of the ancient Near East. The delicate balance that had maintained relative stability for over a century, with Mitanni, Egypt, and the Hittites forming 3 points of a triangle of power, collapses into a more volatile system dominated by 2 aggressive empires, Assyria and Hittite. The immediate aftermath sees scrambling by smaller kingdoms and city-states to adjust to the new reality. Cities that had been Mitanni vassals must now choose new overlords. The choice is rarely free. It depends on geography, military pressure, and calculations about which great power can best provide security and economic opportunity. Some regions experience multiple transitions in quick succession. A city might submit to Hittite control when Hittite armies arrive, then switch to Assyrian overlordship when Hittite forces withdraw and Assyrian armies appear, then potentially rebel when both powers are distracted elsewhere, only to be reconquered by whichever empire returns first. This instability devastates local populations, who bear the costs of warfare, changing tribute demands, and the vengeance of returning overlords against disloyal cities. The trade networks that once enriched Mitanni and its vassals face disruption. Merchants must navigate a more fragmented political landscape. paying tolls to multiple authorities, facing higher risks of banditry in contested territories, and dealing with less predictable political conditions. Some trade routes decline in importance, others shift to avoid unstable regions. Population movements become common during this transitional period. Refugees flee war zones. Assyrian kings practice systematic deportation, moving conquered populations to different regions to break local power structures and provide labor for royal projects. Some groups of displaced people settle in new areas, creating ethnically mixed communities. Others maintain their identities in exile, perhaps hoping to eventually return to their homelands. With Mitanni's destruction removing the buffer state, Egypt and the Hittite Empire engage in direct competition for control of Syria, a conflict that will define Near Eastern politics for decades. The Egyptian pharaohs of the 19th dynasty, particularly Seti I and Ramesses II, pursue aggressive policies to reassert Egyptian control over Syrian territories. Egyptian armies march north along the Levantine coast, besieging cities, fighting battles against Hittite forces and their local allies, and attempting to restore Egyptian prestige after the decline of Egyptian influence during Akhenaten's reign. The Hittites, now controlling territories that extend deep into Syria, cannot accept Egyptian expansion without response. Hittite kings maintain substantial military forces in Syria, build alliances with local rulers, and confront Egyptian armies when they push too far north. The competition culminates in the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, one of the best documented military conflicts of the ancient world. Ramesses II leads a large Egyptian army north to confront the Hittite king Muwatalli II near the city of Kadesh on the Orontes River. The battle becomes famous not for its decisive outcome. Both sides claim victory, and the actual result appears to be a tactical draw, but for the extensive documentation. Egyptian temple reliefs, particularly at Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum, depict the battle in dramatic detail. Ramesses II's personal account describes how he heroically rallies Egyptian forces after a Hittite ambush nearly destroys the Egyptian army. Hittite records provide a different perspective on the same events. Modern historians, comparing the competing accounts, reconstruct a battle where neither side achieved clear victory, but both empires recognized that continued warfare served neither's interests. The Battle of Kadesh and subsequent conflicts prove costly for both empires. Neither can achieve decisive victory. Both face other military challenges. The Hittites deal with threats in Anatolia, while Egypt faces Libyan incursions and internal administrative challenges. After years of inconclusive warfare, both empires recognize that peace serves their interests better than continued conflict. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty, concluded around 1259 BCE between Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III, represents a diplomatic milestone. This is not merely a truce or temporary ceasefire, but a comprehensive peace agreement that establishes a new framework for relations between the two great powers. The treaty survives in both Egyptian and Hittite versions, inscribed on temple walls in Egypt and preserved on clay tablets in the Hittite archives. The existence of both versions allows modern scholars to compare the texts and gain insight into how each side presented the agreement to its own population. The treaty establishes mutual recognition and respect. Egypt and Hatti acknowledge each other as equal powers, using the brotherhood language that had characterized the earlier Mitanni-Egyptian alliance. They agree to mutual defense. If either kingdom faces attack by a third party, the other will provide military assistance. This defensive alliance aims to deter aggression by other powers, particularly Assyria. The treaty includes provisions for extradition of fugitives. If someone flees from one kingdom to the other, they must be returned. This provision protects both kingdoms from destabilizing activities by exiles and refugees who might plot against their home governments from foreign sanctuaries. Most remarkably, the treaty establishes a clear frontier in Syria. Egypt controls territories to the south and along the Levantine coast. The Hittites control northern Syria and inland territories. The precise boundary is carefully delineated, removing the ambiguities that had fueled conflicts. Cities know definitively which empire they owe allegiance to, reducing opportunities for playing the great powers against each other. The treaty is sealed through marriage diplomacy, echoing the earlier Mitanni Egyptian practice. A Hittite princess, daughter of Hattusili III, travels to Egypt to marry Rameses II. This marriage creates kinship ties between the royal families and provides both personal and political incentives for maintaining peace. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty works. For the remainder of both empires' existence, Egypt and Hatti remain at peace, engaging in diplomatic correspondence, exchanging gifts, and cooperating on matters of mutual interest. The treaty demonstrates that even aggressive military empires can recognize when negotiated settlements serve their interests better than continued warfare. Yet the treaty also reveals what has been lost with Mitanni's destruction. The earlier system, with three major powers maintaining balance, had proven stable for over a century with minimal major warfare. The new system, though it eventually produces peace, required decades of destructive conflict before the powers negotiated a settlement. The buffer that Mitanni provided, both geographically and diplomatically, had prevented direct confrontation between Egypt and Hatti. Without that buffer, conflict became inevitable before peace could be established. While Egypt and Hatti struggle for control of Syria, Assyria methodically consolidates its control over the former Mitanni territories in Upper Mesopotamia. The Assyrian approach differs fundamentally from both Egyptian and Hittite methods, presaging the systematic imperial administration that will characterize the later Neo-Assyrian Empire. Assyrian kings imposed direct provincial administration over conquered territories. They replace local rulers with Assyrian governors who answer directly to Ashur. These governors command military forces, collect taxes, administer justice, and oversee royal building projects. This system provides tighter central control than the vassal arrangements that characterized Mitanni administration. The Assyrian practice of deportation, moving conquered populations from their homelands to other regions of the empire, serves multiple purposes. It breaks the power of local elites who might organize resistance. It provides labor for agricultural development and construction projects in different regions. It creates ethnically mixed populations that lack the cohesion to rebel effectively, and it demonstrates Assyrian power and the futility of resistance. Assyrian royal inscriptions from this period emphasize the completeness of Assyrian conquest. They describe the destruction of Mitanni not as the defeat of a rival, but as the restoration of territories that have belonged to Assyria since ancient times. This revisionist narrative serves to legitimate Assyrian expansion and erase Mitanni from historical memory. The consolidation of former Mitanni territories provides Assyria with a substantial power base. The region's agricultural productivity, strategic location, and population make it essential to Assyrian strength. Control of these territories allows Assyria to compete with more established powers like Babylonia and to project military force into Syria, threatening Hittite interests. By the late 13th century BCE, Assyria has emerged as one of the ancient Near East's dominant powers, a remarkable transformation from the humiliated vassal state that paid tribute to Mitanni just over a century earlier. The memory of that humiliation, preserved in Assyrian historical consciousness, fuels Assyrian determination to never again accept subservient status and to build an empire so powerful that no enemy can threaten Assyrian independence. The destruction of Mitanni precedes by several decades one of history's most catastrophic periods, the Late Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, The interconnected civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East face simultaneous crises that destroy or severely damage nearly every major kingdom. The Hittite Empire, which had conquered much of Mitanni's western territories, collapses entirely. The Hittite capital Hattusa is destroyed, burned so thoroughly that the city is abandoned and never reoccupied. The Hittite kingdom fragments into smaller successor states, never to be reunited. The factors causing Hittite collapse remain debated: invasion by sea peoples, internal rebellions, environmental stress, economic systems failure. But the result is undeniable. The great power that destroyed Mitanni itself vanishes from history. Egypt survives, but emerges severely weakened. Rameses III fights desperate defensive battles against invaders he terms sea peoples, a coalition of groups whose precise identity remains mysterious, but whose attacks devastate the Eastern Mediterranean. Egypt retreats from its Asian empire, abandoning the Syrian territories that Egyptian pharaohs had fought for during the preceding centuries. The new kingdom enters terminal decline, eventually fragmenting into competing power centers. Mycenaean Greece collapses. The palatial centers at Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and elsewhere are destroyed. The sophisticated Linear B writing system is lost, and Greece enters a dark age lasting several centuries. The Hittite vassal states in Anatolia disappear. Cyprus faces invasions and destruction. The prosperous trading cities along the Levantine coast, Ugarit, Sidon, and others, are destroyed, many never to be rebuilt on the same scale. The interconnected Bronze Age economic system, which had linked these civilizations through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, collapses. Long-distance trade in tin, copper, luxury goods, and other commodities ceases or radically contracts. The diplomatic correspondence that characterized great power relations ends. The sophisticated palace-centered economies that supported Bronze Age civilization disintegrate. Assyria and Babylonia survive better than most Bronze Age states, perhaps because their power centers lie further east, somewhat removed from the Western Mediterranean chaos. But even these kingdoms face challenges. Assyria enters a period of reduced power during the 12th and 11th centuries BCE, before eventually recovering and beginning the expansion that will create the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Could Mitanni have survived the late Bronze Age collapse had the kingdom not been destroyed earlier? The question is counterfactual and ultimately unanswerable, but it's worth considering. Mitanni's position in Upper Mesopotamia placed it geographically between the eastern kingdoms that survived relatively better and the western regions that suffered catastrophic collapse. The kingdom might have faced severe challenges, but potentially could have survived in some form, possibly emerging as one of the powers in the post-collapse world. Though Mitanni vanished as a political entity, its military innovations left lasting impacts that shaped warfare for centuries. The chariot warfare techniques that the Mitanni perfected spread throughout the ancient world. The sophisticated training methods for chariot horses, preserved in texts like Kikuli's treatise, influenced military practice from Egypt to Assyria to the early kingdoms of Iran. The three-man chariot crews that later Assyrian kings favor, driver, archer, and shield-bearer, represent an evolution of the two-man Mitanni model. More significantly, the Mitanni emphasis on cavalry, both chariots and later mounted warriors fighting on horseback, pointed toward military developments that would revolutionize ancient warfare. The horse culture that the Maryannu brought to the Near East established equestrianism as a prestigious and militarily essential skill. Later empires, particularly the Assyrians and Persians, would build on this foundation. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, rising in the centuries after Mitanni's fall, develops the ancient world's most effective military machine. Assyrian armies combine infantry, chariots, cavalry, and siege equipment in sophisticated combined arms tactics. The Assyrian cavalry, in particular, benefits from horse-breeding traditions that trace back to the Mitanni period. By the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, Assyrian cavalry becomes the dominant arm of the military, gradually superseding chariots in importance. The later Persian Empire, which conquers the Neo-Assyrian Empire's successor states, also emphasizes cavalry. Persian nobles serve as elite cavalrymen, echoing the role that Maryannu warriors played in Mitanni. The Achaemenid Persian cavalry, which terrifies Greek infantrymen during the Greco-Persian Wars, represents a direct descendant of the cavalry traditions that began with the Mitanni. Even farther afield, the military innovations associated with Mitanni influence warfare in regions that never had direct contact with the kingdom. The Indo-Aryan peoples who migrate into India bring similar horse culture traditions, developing chariot warfare that plays important roles in early Indian history. The techniques of horse training and chariot construction spread along trade routes, reaching the steppes of Central Asia and eventually influencing Chinese warfare when chariots appear in Shang Dynasty China. The Hurrian language and cultural traditions that formed the foundation of Mitanni civilization dispersed after the kingdom's fall, but elements survived in surprising contexts. Hurrian religious texts preserved in Hittite archives influenced the development of Hittite religion and mythology. The Hittites adopted Hurrian deities into their pantheon, sometimes under Hurrian names and sometimes under Hittite names, but with Hurrian characteristics. The Song of Ulikumi, a Hurrian myth preserved in Hittite translation, tells of conflict between gods and a stone monster, a narrative that some scholars suggest influenced later Greek myths about Titans and Olympian gods. Hurrian deities appear in the pantheons of various Near Eastern peoples. Teshub, the Hurrian storm god, is identified with or influences conceptions of storm deities in multiple cultures. Hepat, Teshub's consort, continues to be worshipped in various forms. These religious traditions carry Hurrian cultural elements into later periods and different geographical regions. The Hurrian language itself gradually disappears as a living tongue, absorbed into the dominant languages of the empires that conquer Mitanni territories. But linguistic traces persist. Some Hurrian words enter Akkadian, particularly terms related to horses, chariots, and military matters. The Indo-Aryan vocabulary associated with the Maryannu elite contributes specialized terms that spread throughout the Near East. Personal names of Hurrian origin continue to appear in texts from regions that were once part of Mitanni, generations and even centuries after the kingdom's fall. These names suggest that some sense of Hurrian ethnic identity persisted at the individual or family level, even after Hurrian political power ended and the language declined. Artistic and craft traditions show continuities spanning Mitanni's political collapse. Pottery styles that developed during the Mitanni period influenced ceramics in successor regions. Metalworking techniques, textile production methods, and architectural features show gradual evolution rather than sharp breaks, suggesting that artisan communities maintained their practices even as political authority changed. The seal-cutting tradition, which had reached high artistic standards during the Mitanni period, continues in modified forms. Later, Assyrian, Babylonian, and even Persian seals sometimes show stylistic elements traceable to Mitanni-era designs. These objects, small and portable, carry cultural information across temporal and geographical boundaries. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Mitanni's legacy is how thoroughly the kingdom disappeared from historical memory. For over 2 millennia, the very existence of Mitanni was forgotten, known only indirectly through brief references in Egyptian, Hittite, and Assyrian texts that didn't fully explain what Mitanni was or why it mattered. The reasons for this historical erasure are multiple and interconnected. First, Mitanni left fewer monumental inscriptions than neighboring civilizations. Egyptian pharaohs carved their achievements on temple walls that survived millennia. Hittite kings left rock inscriptions and archives at Hattusa. Assyrian rulers created palace reliefs and annals that documented their reigns. Mitanni, by contrast, apparently favored less durable forms of record-keeping, or their monuments were destroyed so thoroughly that they haven't been recovered. Second, the conquerors who destroyed Mitanni had incentives to erase the kingdom from memory. Assyrian kings, in particular, presented their conquests as restoration of ancient Assyrian territories rather than as conquest of a powerful foreign kingdom. By denying Mitanni's greatness, Assyria avoided acknowledging how thoroughly Mitanni had once humiliated Assyria. The Assyrian historical narrative leaves little room for recognizing Mitanni as a great power. Third, the late Bronze Age collapse that followed Mitanni's destruction by several decades disrupted historical continuity throughout the region. When literacy returns to Greece after the Greek Dark Age, memory of the Mycenaean past has become legend rather than history. Similarly, the upheavals of circa 1200 BCE may have contributed to loss of historical memory about the pre-collapse Bronze Age world, including Mitanni. Fourth, Washukani's disappearance, whether through destruction, abandonment, or burial beneath accumulated soil, removed the physical center that might have preserved Mitanni memory. Other ancient cities, Babylon, Nineveh, Damascus, remained occupied or recognizable, maintaining continuity of identity. Washukani's loss meant loss of the most important physical embodiment of Mitanni civilization. The modern rediscovery of Mitanni began in the 19th century as archaeologists deciphered cuneiform texts and excavated ancient sites. The Amarna letters, discovered in Egypt in the 1880s, revealed the existence of a powerful kingdom that had corresponded with Egyptian pharaohs as an equal. But even then, piecing together Mitanni history proved challenging. The fragmentary nature of the sources, the absence of Mitanni's own archives, and the linguistic challenges of Hurrian all complicated reconstruction. Today, over a century after the rediscovery, significant gaps remain in our understanding of Mitanni. The location of Washukani remains unknown. Many aspects of Mitanni internal organization and administration remain uncertain. The precise chronology of Mitanni kings and their reigns continues to be debated. Yet despite these challenges, modern scholarship has recovered enough to recognize Mitanni as a major Bronze Age civilization that shaped the ancient Near East in profound ways. What lessons does Mitanni's history offer for understanding empires, power, and the dynamics of international relations? First, Mitanni demonstrates how cultural synthesis can create powerful new civilizations. The fusion of Hurrian culture with Maryannu military expertise generated something greater than either component alone. The Hurrians provided administrative sophistication, agricultural productivity, and deep cultural roots. The Maryannu contributed military innovation and organizational skills. The combination produced a kingdom that could compete with much older civilizations. This pattern of cultural fusion recurs throughout history. The Hellenistic kingdoms that followed Alexander the Great's conquests combined Greek and Near Eastern elements. The Islamic caliphates synthesized Arabian, Persian, and Greco-Roman traditions. The Mongol Empire incorporated diverse cultural elements from the peoples it conquered. Mitanni's example illustrates how hybrid civilizations can possess remarkable dynamism and creativity. Second, Mitanni's history reveals the importance of geography and military technology in determining power. The kingdom rose to prominence by controlling the technologies of chariot warfare and horse breeding at a time when these innovations were revolutionizing military capabilities. Its geographical position at the crossroads of major trade routes and between rival powers provided both opportunities and vulnerabilities. But technology and geography alone don't determine success. Mitanni maintained its position through diplomatic skill, particularly the alliance with Egypt that secured its southern frontier for over a century. When diplomatic relationships failed, when Egypt became distracted during Akhenaten's reign and couldn't or wouldn't support Mitanni against Hittite aggression, geography became a liability rather than an asset, leaving Mitanni exposed to attacks from multiple directions. Third, Mitanni's collapse illustrates how succession crises can destroy even powerful states. The civil war between Tushratta and Artatama II provided the opportunity that Mitanni's enemies needed. The kingdom's political system, which relied on the Maryannu aristocracy's support for the king, lacked clear succession mechanisms. When the aristocracy divided, the kingdom shattered. This vulnerability to succession crises recurs throughout history. The Macedonian Empire fragments immediately after Alexander's death. The Carolingian Empire divides among Charlemagne's grandsons. The Mongol Empire splits into competing khanates. Strong, centralized leadership can mask structural weaknesses that become catastrophic when that leadership fails or is contested. Fourth, Mitanni's story demonstrates how quickly the balance of power can shift in international systems. For over a century, Mitanni was one of the ancient Near East's great powers. Within a single generation, it ceased to exist as an independent state. The late Bronze Age international system, seemingly stable, collapsed with remarkable speed once its key components began failing. Modern international relations theorists might recognize in Mitanni's story familiar dynamics: alliance politics, balance of power, the role of buffer states in maintaining stability, and the dangers of power vacuums. The Mitanni case offers historical depth to understanding how international systems function and fail. Despite over a century of archaeological work since Mitanni's rediscovery, major mysteries remain, challenges that continue to intrigue researchers and offer opportunities for future discoveries. The location of Washukani remains the most tantalizing unsolved mystery. Modern technology offers new tools for this search. Satellite imagery can reveal subtle surface features invisible from ground level. Ground-penetrating radar can detect buried structures without excavation. LiDAR technology, which uses laser scanning to create detailed topographical maps, can identify ancient sites hidden beneath vegetation or modern development. Political stability in the regions where Washukani most likely existed would enable more systematic archaeological surveys. Future peace in Syria and improved access to southeastern Turkey might allow research that current conditions prevent. The discovery of Washukani would revolutionize our understanding of Mitanni, potentially revealing royal archives, monumental architecture, and artifacts that could answer fundamental questions about the kingdom. Beyond Washukani, numerous other Mitanni period sites await excavation or more thorough investigation. Known sites have often been excavated using older methods that modern archaeology could improve upon. New excavations with contemporary techniques might recover evidence overlooked by earlier archaeologists, organic materials through advanced preservation methods, minute artifacts through fine screening, environmental data through soil analysis, and paleobotany. The decipherment of Hurrian continues to progress, but many texts remain only partially understood. As scholars develop more sophisticated understanding of Hurrian grammar and vocabulary, previously obscure texts might yield new insights. Digital humanities methods, using computer analysis to identify patterns in large text corpora, might reveal connections and meanings that human scholars working with individual texts couldn't detect. Genetic and isotopic analysis of human remains from Mitanni period sites could reveal information about population movements, diet, health, and kinship relationships. DNA analysis might clarify the origins of the Maryannu and their relationship to other Indo-European populations. Isotopic analysis of teeth and bones can show where individuals grew up and what they ate, providing data about migration and social stratification. Why should modern audiences care about a kingdom that vanished over 3,000 years ago, whose capital remains undiscovered, and whose very name was forgotten for 2 millennia? First, Mitanni's story enriches our understanding of human civilization in a crucial period. The Late Bronze Age witnessed the first truly international system of great powers interacting through diplomacy, trade, and warfare. Understanding this period helps us comprehend how complex societies develop, how international relations function, and how civilizations rise and fall. Mitanni was a major player in this system, and its history is essential to understanding the Bronze Age world. Second, the regions that once formed the Mitanni Kingdom remain geopolitically important today. Northern Syria, northern Iraq, and southeastern Turkey continue to be zones of conflict, competition, and cultural significance. Understanding the deep history of these regions, including the Mitanni period, provides context for modern developments. The challenges of ethnic diversity, competing power centers, and strategic geography that Mitanni faced have modern parallels. Third, Mitanni's cultural legacy, though often unrecognized, influenced civilizations that directly shaped our modern world. The military innovations perfected by the Mitanni influenced Assyrian and Persian warfare, which in turn influenced Greek military development. Greek civilization influenced Rome. Roman influence pervades Western civilization. The chain of cultural transmission, though attenuated by time and distance, connects Mitanni to modernity. Fourth, the story of how Mitanni was forgotten and then rediscovered illustrates important lessons about historical memory and preservation. What we know about the past depends on what evidence survives and how we interpret it. Powerful civilizations can vanish from memory when their monuments are destroyed, their texts lost, and their conquerors control the historical narrative. Modern conflicts in the Middle East continue to threaten archaeological sites and historical knowledge. The loss of Washukani reminds us how much history can be lost. The ongoing archaeological work reminds us that lost knowledge can sometimes be recovered. Fifth, Mitanni's example of cultural fusion, the synthesis of Hurrian and Indo-Aryan elements into a distinctive civilization, offers a counter-narrative to visions of cultural purity. The Mitanni didn't succeed by maintaining rigid ethnic boundaries, but by combining the strengths of different traditions. In our modern world of cultural interaction, migration, and mixing, Mitanni's example reminds us that cultural hybridity can be a source of strength rather than weakness. Finally, the very obscurity of Mitanni should humble us. This was one of the Bronze Age's great powers, a kingdom that commanded respect from Egypt, dominated Assyria, and shaped its world for over 2 centuries. Yet, it vanished so completely that its very existence was forgotten for 2,000 years. How many other civilizations, peoples, and achievements have been lost to history? What else might we rediscover? What knowledge have we lost forever? The search for Washukani continues. Scholars work to decipher remaining Hurrian texts. Archaeologists excavate Mitanni period sites, uncovering new evidence. Each discovery adds pieces to the puzzle, gradually clarifying the picture of this forgotten kingdom. The Mitanni ruled as horse lords of the ancient Near East, their chariot warriors thundering across the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. They negotiated as equals with pharaohs, humbled the proud Assyrians, and created a civilization that synthesized diverse cultural traditions into something new and powerful. Though their kingdom fell and their capital vanished, their story survives, recovered from ancient tablets, reconstructed from fragmentary evidence, and preserved in the memory of those who study the deep human past. In understanding Mitanni, we understand something fundamental about human civilization, that great powers can rise from unexpected sources, that cultural synthesis generates creativity and strength, that diplomatic skill can matter as much as military might, and that even the mightiest kingdoms can fall and be forgotten. But we also learn that history once lost can sometimes be recovered, that patient scholarship and archaeological discovery can resurrect civilizations from oblivion and restore their rightful place in humanity's story. The Mitanni may be forgotten by most, but their legacy lives on, in the military traditions they helped create, in the cultural elements they spread across the Near East, in the diplomatic patterns they established, and in the lessons their rise and fall offer to anyone willing to look back across 3,000 years and see the horse lords riding across the ancient world. The story of Mitanni reminds us that history is not just the tale of the empires that left the largest monuments or the most extensive written records. It is also the story of the forgotten, civilizations that shaped their world profoundly but left fewer traces for posterity to discover. As this documentary concludes, the search for Mitanni continues. Perhaps someday, an archaeologist's shovel will uncover the walls of Washukani. Perhaps future scholarship will decipher texts that revolutionize our understanding. Perhaps new technologies will reveal secrets that have lain hidden for 3 millennia. Until then, we honor the memory of the Mitanni, the horse lords who mastered the chariot, the diplomats who negotiated with pharaohs, the builders of a kingdom that stood at the center of the Bronze Age world. Though their cities have crumbled and their names have been forgotten by all but scholars, their story deserves to be told and remembered. For in the end, all civilizations, no matter how powerful, face the test of time. The monuments erode, the texts decay, the memories fade. What survives is the knowledge we preserve and pass on, the stories we tell about who came before us, what they achieved, and what we can learn from their triumphs and tragedies. The Mitanni, the forgotten horse lords of the ancient Near East. May their story inspire curiosity about the past, respect for the achievements of ancient peoples, and determination to preserve and recover the human heritage that connects us all to our ancestors.